Konnichiwa! I am mckay, and welcome to another mckay book review. Today, it is my deep, deep honor to be talking to you about Fear and Trembling by Amélie Nothomb. But first, a little joke. Don't be a racist. Be like Mario. Mario is an Italian plumber made by the Japanese. He a speaker English. He look like a Mexicano. He jump like a black man. And he grab coin like a Jew. Let us begin.
Everyone knows that Japan has the highest suicide rate of any country in the world. What surprised me was that suicides were not more common. People with menial jobs conjure up what Nietzsche calls a background world, forcing themselves to believe in an earthly or heavenly paradise. Their mental Eden is as seductive as their job is repugnant. What awaited these poor number crunchers outside the company? The obligatory beer with colleagues undergoing the same kind of gradual lobotomy. Hours spent stuffed into an overcrowded subway. A dozing wife. Exhausted children. Sleep that sucked them down into it like the vortex of a flushing toilet. The occasional day off they never took full advantage of. Nothing that deserved to be called a life. And the worst part of it all was that they were considered lucky. If you admire yourself in the mirror, let it be in fear and not delight, because the only thing that beauty will bring to you is terror of losing it. Japanese women live in fear of making the least sound in a bathroom stall. Japanese men pay no attention to the subject whatsoever. No, if the Japanese woman is to be admired, and she is, it is because she doesn't commit suicide. Society conspires against her from her earliest infancy. Her brain is steadily filled with plaster until it sets. If you're not married by the time you're 25, you'll have good reason to be ashamed. If you laugh, you won't look dignified. If your face betrays your feelings, you'll look coarse. If you mention the existence of a single body hair, you're repulsive. If a boy kisses you on the cheek in public, you're a whore. If you enjoy eating, you're a pig. If you take pleasure in sleeping, you're no better than a cow. And so on. These precepts would be merely anecdotal if they weren't taken so much to heart. First published in 1999 in the original French and then in English 2 years later, Fear and Trembling by Amélie Nothomb is, or was, I suppose, quite the little sensation when it first came out. It continues to be quite popular to this day and is the author's most popular novel as far as I'm aware. And it is a novel that, in all honesty, I don't have that much to say about, but I actually think that that's a good thing. And what I'm hoping by keeping this relatively short and sweet is being demonstrative of the experience you'll have should you decide to read it. That's the hope, at least. It is a semi-autobiographical novel, and I say that mainly because I think what the publisher, or possibly Amélie herself, was going for with that by claiming it to be such was to further extend and enhance the very satirical element of the novel, because it is dripping with satire throughout, and by labelling it a kind of semi-autobiographical thing or a romano clef, whatever you want to call it, it kind of just adds to the tongue-in-cheek element. I'm sure the experience was genuine, that, you know, as a young woman in her early 20s, she did go over to Japan to be a translator in a corporation. In the book, it's called Yominamoto. And so, yeah, I feel like all of the things that take place, more or less, or to an extent, kind of happened, but no way to the extremity that they go to in the novel. But that is obviously where a lot of the comedy is derived, in this kind of... You not only do you have the kind of corporate landscape and all of its absurdity, but you also have the kind of culture clash, what with Amélie being a Westerner, going to Japan and having these, clashes of her own upbringing, although she was, I think, born there until a certain age and then moved, and so she's coming back. And but you also get it with the sense of the honor system that the Japanese live by and have done for, centuries, essentially. But also how I think the corporate world kind of takes advantage of that a little bit. But on saying that, I also still feel like the absurdity that is found in this kind of way of life can be satirized wherever you are on the globe. And I think it does take full advantage of, well, certain systems and whatnot. Like in a lot of ways these days, I think the corporate way of the fact that it lives almost like an entity, and it kind of like it has an identity, almost absolves it from being responsible for the dictates and contradictions it lives by. And because it operates in this militant type of system where there is a hierarchy, there's a lot of room for incompetence and passing the buck and all that type of thing, which is very rife in Fear and Trembling. And not to get too caught up in the whole corporate level of things, but it is very much in that type of world. And Amélie is quickly confronted by not only this hierarchy system, but of how her way of doing things is going to come in direct conflict with how it's run at the Yominamoto Corporation. Anytime she takes initiative, be it to, deliver the mail a little bit more often or keep it kind of concise and well organized, if it's outside of her nominated kind of department, then she will get in trouble for it, and she'll be not punished exactly, but, well, she is as it goes on. But yeah, she's kind of quickly told to, stick in her lane and all that type of thing. And there are a number of other characters in it. There's one particularly fat individual who, in one particular scene, is kind of like berating her to the point where he's almost having a stroke. Can't remember what that was over exactly. But then it almost becomes a bit of a power struggle because he offers her some like green looking chocolate, which I think is made of melon or something. And it's a highly comical scene. But just to give a general overview, as she joins this place, it quickly becomes obvious to her that she's not really that needed, and it's almost like she's been taken on as a courtesy more than anything else. I'm not sure if that was the actual case, but even though she does utilize her translation skills, and I suppose what was the biggest event in the entire novel was when she took that initiative and kind of worked in cahoots with another member who was actually probably the kindest man in there. But because he wasn't really part of her department, they view it as her going behind her immediate superior's back and, being deceptive and showing like her initiative kind of shows a complete lack of respect in their eyes and is very much looked down upon. And from there, she's basically treated more or less like an invalid who is, because of her Western upbringing and whatnot, too stupid and individualist to see the greater goal about being a kind of collective and all of that type of stuff. So the satire is often derived from the cultural conflict, but I think it's both in how a corporation operates versus the Japanese way of living, but also in Amelie's viewpoint of them being a Western woman and not knowing the ins and outs or only having an inkling of them. So she kind of becomes like an outside observer. So a lot of the novel is her pontificating about the Japanese way of life, particularly for women, because Miss Mori, who becomes her immediate superior, is this very stunning, gorgeous spinster, as it's labelled. I think in China they would call it a leftover woman, and I'm sure they have another phrase for it in Japan. But in this era, it was for any woman over 25 who wasn't married. That's probably changed, like it has in China, for anyone that's pushing 30, basically. And so Miss Mori has basically dedicated her whole life to this corporation, and so she claims she, worked her arse off for years to get to the position she's at. And when she sees Amélie going, behind her back to do this report and doing a great job with it, she kind of views it as her belittling and potentially becoming a threat, I suppose. So she's then assigned to do some kind of accounting work, which I actually thought must have been hellish, because what she's required to do is deal with the expenses for when other employees were traveling abroad. But she has to basically find the currency rate at that particular date and then add it in so it matches what they're claiming. And for the life of her, Amélie can't do this, but Miss Mori can do it in seconds flat. A part of me was thinking, did she just add it up so it matched and it made her look like, she was, a super genius with mathematics? Because it just, it felt very like, I don't know how you could do that so quickly if you were to do it by such a specific time, date, place, and how often that changes on a day-to-day basis. But whatever, it accomplishes what I think she wants it to by basically making Amélie question her own intelligence over and over and over, and to the point where she is basically saying, I am a bit of a retard. You'll have to forgive me. It's my Western brain, all this type of thing. And as the novel goes on, it just becomes more and more degrading. There's a bit where she's required to do some photocopying, and the boss basically says, this isn't good enough. Do you not even know how to use a photocopying machine? Do it individually. So you can't use the automated system. You're going to have to do each sheet one by one. Amélie does this. He still complains. So then she resorts to just doing it automatically, because she already knows that he's going to complain about it no matter what. And it was over something ridiculous like the golf rules for the club he's at. So it's not even really work related anyway. And before long, it does become, I can't remember exactly how she ends up working in the toilets. Maybe it'll come to me in a bit. But by the end of it, she is basically designated to clean both the men and women's toilets on a kind of, obviously not 24/7 basis, but from 9 till 5, she's just standing around in the toilet. So when anyone does anything in there, she's to immediately clean it or to replace the loo roll and stuff like that. And I suppose the events of the novel aren't really what you'd get, the most enjoyment out of. I enjoyed the level of ridiculousness as it went on. It just got more and more absurd, and that was nicely mirroring the kind of ridiculous ins and outs and rules of the place in general. So it was kind of like her experiencing just how ridiculous and mundane the whole day-to-day kind of experience was, whether you are doing something that requires intellect or not in a lot of ways. So it kind of almost mirrored it. And she does comment on this about, I think in one of the quotes at the beginning, it's just like they're just giving up their lives for this for nothing, and my Sisyphean kind of struggle is exactly the same as theirs, and it leads nowhere. You know, we're just all constantly rolling back down that hill just to go back up it. And because this happens at about the halfway point of her year-long contract, she kind of perseveres and, you know, swears to herself that she can get through it. And she does. And I suppose you could wonder at the end, like, what's the point of the novel in a lot of ways? But I think really that's what's so enjoyable about it in a way, because you're only ever inside this corporate building. We don't get to see Amélie outside of it. And there was a point where I was even wondering about that, of like, all it's spoken about is this workplace environment. But then oddly, I think her being such a good writer, she then knew to put that in, of like, now I'm coming near the end, I will explain my reasons why I've decided to only include this, because obviously there was a life for her outside of all of this, but she has chosen just to speak of this particular juncture because of its significance to her and the struggle that she has with it. I think some people, especially these days, would get annoyed by the apparent misappropriation or whatever, but that's just ridiculous overall. Like, obviously it's satire, and, you know, if the adage, many a truth is spoken in jest, is true, then we are getting a accurate, if only anecdotal, kind of viewpoint on what it was like at this particular time for, let's remember, she's a young woman who's trying to impress. So we've all been, you know, in our early 20s. And at that time, we do have this kind of blind arrogance and self-conceitedness that kind of makes us think we know a lot more than we do. And it's only by our mid to late 20s that we realise just how many holes are in the so-called knowledge that we once thought was so strong. Because, yeah, the world is very vast and we are but ants on it a lot of the time. The most interesting element is the relationship between her and Miss Maury, especially considering that she actually really looks up to her and, you know, admires her beauty and whatnot. But she also kind of sees this childlike element to her where whenever she's around men, especially like desirable men, she kind of turns into this submissive little kitten and stuff like that. And it's just these little observations throughout the novel that are actually very fascinating and can give insight into her own, you know, way of looking at things. But I think also gives a nice overview of what it is like for a Westerner around this particular time and how they're treated. You could say there's an element of stereotyping. Yeah, so what? You know, I just don't really see the problem with that. And yeah, I mean, at the end of it all, it is just a kind of highly tongue-in-cheek observational piece. And I have no problem with her being somewhat racist because I'm British, and being British, I have a lot in common with the Japanese in terms of how racist we are. So yeah, maybe because of my Englishness, it doesn't really bother me at all. And I think some of the observations in it, as hilarious as they are, may also hold true quite a lot of the time. I mean, it's kind of hard to say considering the corporate setting lends itself to this absurdity so often, irregardless of whether it's in the East or West. But, you know, there was some psychological study about the way people view things, and it was comparing the East to the West. And I forget where I read this, but it would show a picture basically of somebody in the street. There's a few things in the background and all of that, but it would ask people from the West, like, what do they see? And most of them would just say they see the person in the middle, center frame, looking straight into the camera. They don't really consider what else is around. But the Eastern mind is much more prone to take in the whole, because they do have a more collective viewpoint of things. Whether that is genuine a lot of the time, because in a corporate setting you would imagine it's bullshit, it's just what they say to keep you on, you know, board and all of that kind of stuff, and give you this false sense of collectivism. But it still holds more true that there is a tendency to see things just slightly differently, just because of the way, or the differences between the East and West. The West is highly individualized, and that is very much pointed out in the first person and very self-oriented viewpoint of Amélie as a character. So I think everything's actually very nicely balanced out. And what I really liked about it was how it ended, because there's this constant shit testing between her and Miss Maury. And you kind of think, is this because they see each other as competition? Do they genuinely loathe each other? Is there actual respect and kind of female solidarity actually going on here? And I think by the end, when it becomes quite meta, won't spoil it completely, but it does this, very meta kind of fiction type thing. And then it signs it off, I thought, really beautifully, where it just kind of acknowledged, like, no, I did see you. And I congratulate you, essentially. And I thought it was a really nice way to sign things off. The writing's really nice. I hope the quotes at the beginning also demonstrated that. And it is just a cozy kind of read. And the thing I found I respected the most about it was how much it knew itself as a novel. You know, in the whole know thyself kind of Greek philosophy, if you will. It's very much a kind of self-aware piece that knows what it wants to say, says it, and then adds nothing else and no fluff or filler to kind of puff it out. It's, an easy read. It's oddly comforting in that regard, because we're all somewhat familiar with the concept of monotony and of, repetitive kind of functions, but also of that, not necessarily office environment. I know not everyone has that experience, but certainly ones where it comes in and you've got your kind of place in, the department. Your job is assigned to do this, that, and the other. And more often than not, people will ignore things that they're not responsible for because they don't consider it a part of their job and all that type of thing. A lot of the exchanges were hilarious, I thought, because of how ridiculous they really became, and like the arguments that were given across, and Amélie's youthful naivete was also comical, because she does come across as pretty arrogant and stuff, but at the same time she is quite astute and on point. I thought, especially when she was giving a viewpoint on how the Japanese around her operate. And overall it's very pleasant read, very fun, and one I would be intrigued to read more of her stuff, especially like thinking about what or where she might go with it. If it was all, self-autobiographical, maybe I would be a little bit more reluctant, but as a kind of, I suppose a piece that does sit between fiction and non, but in a very satirical way. It's kind of like, it's playful in that regard, and that's kind of what makes it stand out a little bit, I think, because it's not really identifying with one or the other, but it's playing with both to an extent. And that just seems to be the cherry on top of the comedy within, that's kind of what it's all getting at. Even the kind of pictures of Amélie suggest this kind of like cheekiness. It's this fucking Mona Lisa smile type thing going on with her. Which is seems to be her brand, at least from the outside looking at it. I'd recommend it. If you need a light read, it's only, the ebook was about 100 pages, something like that. So it might be slightly longer in print, or shorter even. But each chapter and each section as it flows, it's like there's really nice moments where you'll have scenes that are just filled with dialogue and exchanges, and that's where the kind of biggest events kind of happen. But probably the most intriguing part is when she just goes off on kind of stream of consciousness rants about Japanese society and how people are supposed to behave in it. And it's very interesting seeing how she views it, and then trying to see how the people actually in it really operate, because there are contradictions, are rife, I would say, throughout, especially in terms of how they're supposed to operate and how they actually operate when they assign Amélie to just scrub toilets. I think it would be considered a bit of a waste of resources, considering it is a corporation. But yeah, that just adds to it all. There is a little film of it as well, actually, that looks quite fun. I haven't watched it, but perhaps if you were to check out the trailer. I mean, the funniest thing, I actually watched the trailer for it, and it said the author was Soren Kierkegaard, which, yeah. I mean, not in the actual video footage, but in the video description. And yeah, I found that kind of like almost on point in terms of the absurdity of it all. It's just like, yeah, okay. They could have called it Stupeur and Trembling in English, I suppose, but it doesn't really have the same ring to it, does it? But yeah, on that note, check it out. I actually think you'll enjoy it because she does have panache with the pen, and it is just, I'd say it's fairly light. I mean, obviously, if you're a sensitive soul and you've been brainwashed by your university to think that anyone not from a particular race speaking about it is apparently inappropriate or triggering or whatever, then you shouldn't really be reading books in general, I would say. Just, yeah, scroll TikTok or something, because reading is not for you, I would say, overall. But anyone else with a brain, check it out sometime.